Hello! Welcome to the podcast, There Is No Spoon. In this episode, I'd like to dive deeper into two ideas that have surfaced in previous discussions. The first one is encapsulated in the well-known phrase, more knowledge, more sorrow. This phrase is derived from Ecclesiastes, for in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. What does this really mean? In a way, a person striving for self-awareness midway through life's journey might seem to be making an irrational choice. The more we understand about ourselves and the world, the more illusions and distortions we dismantle, and the less happy we become. Who is happier? The person who sees the world in simple terms and always blames some external force, or the one who takes full responsibility for their own life? The latter carries a heavy burden. Moreover, deep contemplation of complex questions rarely adds happiness. It often takes it away. And here's the paradox. If self-awareness and personal growth reduce well-being, then why pursue them at all? In the previous episode, I offered one answer, which is true from a certain perspective. We don't really have a choice. Life eventually forces us to confront these questions. Whether we like it or not, we are forced to face them. But why? At what point, and due to what processes, does self-awareness stop being just an option and become an unavoidable necessity? The first part of this question is relatively easy to answer. This necessity arises precisely in the middle of life's journey. It seems like someone was just living their life, no worries, and then, boom, they start contemplating deep stuff. Let's try to figure this out. At this point, I'd like to step away from abstract philosophical discussions about the futility of existence. Instead, I'll try to clarify the issue on a more straightforward and practical level. Why does too much knowledge cause problems? And is it something we should avoid? I believe several overlapping processes are at play here. There is always a trigger that sparks awareness. The specific nature of that trigger isn't particularly important. It could be a major life event, or just a seemingly small, but symbolically significant moment. If you reflect on your own life, you'll likely recall such moments, events that acted as turning points. But the events themselves aren't what truly matter. They are just the catalyst. What matters is what comes to the surface as a result. And this involves several processes. First, the illusions we construct for ourselves gradually begin to crumble. Think of it this way. As children, we believe in Santa Claus, the tooth fairy, or that babies are delivered by storks. Where does this belief come from? Undoubtedly, from our imagination. But why does it work this way? Because children aren't yet adults. They struggle to construct a realistic model of the world. They don't fully grasp social structures, the laws of nature, and other complexities. To be fair, many adults don't either. But our minds can't tolerate contradictions or gaps in understanding. So, when logic fails to provide an answer, imagination steps in to fill the void. Naturally, as we grow up, we let go of many of these illusions. We realize that parents, not Santa Claus, put the presents under the tree, that babies aren't brought by storks, and that mythical figures don't exist as literal beings, but instead represent ideas and archetypes. Why does this happen? Because we accumulate life experience, and at some point, alternative explanations become more convincing. Once a child sees their parents placing gifts under the tree, they recognize that this must have been happening all along. Their belief in Santa Claus collides with the cold, hard truth. But here's the paradox. Adults aren't all that different from children. Their worldview is, of course, more complex and more aligned with reality. But it is still built on many illusions. We believe in the fairness of the world, that good always triumphs over evil, that honesty is always rewarded, that those who suffer must have done something wrong, that there is always someone else to blame for misfortune, and so on. The complexity of these illusions increases. but the fundamental pattern remains unchanged. In this sense, Buddhism is profoundly correct in describing our world as one great illusion. And by midlife, some of these illusions start to collapse under the weight of experience. But while children are relatively quick to give up on Santa Claus when confronted with undeniable facts, and society helps them in this, for adults, the process is far more complicated. By this stage, many illusions have become deeply integrated into our identity. You can't just throw them away overnight. Worse still, some of these illusions are actively reinforced by society because they serve an important social function. Take, for example, the idea that all people are equal. Without diving into an endless ethical debate, let's consider a simple question based on personal experience. Do you truly see all the people around you as equal? Not in terms of legal rights on paper, but in reality. Are all people equally intelligent, equally talented, equally kind? Notice that I'm not suggesting that inequality means superiority or inferiority. Difference does not imply judgment. It simply means we are not the same. Yet many modern Western thinkers focus on an unattainable ideal of equality, one that cannot be achieved because it is fundamentally false. And that's just one example of a widely accepted illusion. We've discussed others before, like the tired belief in a just world. By midlife, we accumulate a vast array of experiences, including many that contradict each other. The core beliefs drilled into us in childhood start clashing with the alternative facts we see with our own eyes. For a child, this isn't such a big deal. They don't have a solid worldview yet, so changing their perspective is easier. But for an adult, it's a real challenge. On top of that, some shifts in beliefs directly affect other areas: personal, professional, financial, and so on. Adults have responsibilities they can't just ignore. And so, we end up in a tricky situation. On one side, there are deeply rooted illusions or distortions, nurtured by society and individuals for decades, and on the other, new facts keep emerging, challenging those illusions. Sure, at first, we might brush these facts off. In fact, that's exactly what we do. If we're used to seeing black spades and red hearts, we simply won't register red spades. But the data keeps piling up. And at some point, our unconscious mind just can't buy into the nonsense our conscious mind is selling anymore. The illusions are already gone. It's just that our conscious mind hasn't caught up yet. And that's when the crisis hits. Can we choose to hold on to our illusions? After all, as the saying goes, more knowledge, more sorrow. Technically, yes. All you have to do is avoid any facts that contradict your beliefs. You could be like Prince Gautama, live in a palace. You could lock yourself away in a monastery or on a deserted island. You could retreat into your own little information bubble. That is, if your circumstances allow it. But would that make your life happy? Maybe, if you can create enough variety for yourself. But usually, as fairy tales have shown us time and time again, the truth finds a way to break through. Because complete isolation is nearly impossible. And once the truth breaks in, the illusions disappear, bringing along their share of trouble. So, here's the pattern. More knowledge, then more awareness of reality as such, a more complex picture of the world, fewer comfortable illusions, and consequently, less well-being. Now, I promised this episode would cover 2 key ideas. We've tackled the first one. The second ties back to something I briefly mentioned last time. It's about the concept of the shadow. This topic gets a lot of attention in modern, and not so modern, Jungian psychology. The shadow is often described as repressed and suppressed desires. Basically, an alter ego of sorts. From the perspective of midlife transition, though, this definition isn't quite accurate. Even more, it creates an image in people's minds, something like Mr. Hyde or Darth Vader, as if our shadow is some kind of evil twin, and that we just need to let it out somehow, release that energy, and integrate it. That's a pretty one-sided take on reality. I'd like to suggest a different interpretation, one that fits with what we've been discussing in this episode. Let me refer to the ideas of James Hollis. He sees the shadow as the wound created within human nature through the imposition of collective social values. It's actually quite simple. As we grow up, we learn how to behave by imitating others, parents, teachers, idols, and so on. Society encourages some behaviors while discouraging others. Exactly what is encouraged or discouraged depends on context. Every country, city, and family has its own rules. Rules dictate that, in certain situations, you act a certain way and not another. And that would be fine, except sometimes people want to do something different. Maybe a little boy wants to play with dolls, or a little girl wants to play with toy cars. What's the big deal? But kids aren't capable of fully processing their desires, societal expectations, and realistic risks. Later in life, we become driven by goals that set their own rules. There's just no time to stop and reflect. And so, all these unfulfilled experiences form the shadow. Not an evil twin, just the things we missed out on or didn't do. And in most cases, it's not even about something bad. It's just how life unfolded. Why does this become more relevant at midlife? Because illusions start falling apart, and we realize that following socially approved paths won't necessarily make us happy. Maybe they serve society, but not us as individuals. We need a different way forward. But the behavioral patterns ingrained in us get in the way, rules about what we can and can't do. There's no deep logic behind them, just habits, social misconceptions, taboos, and other baggage we've reinforced over the years. And that's exactly what we need to unlock. Because the second half of life isn't about adapting to society anymore. It's about our individual journey. We've found our place in society. And now, we need to find our way to ourselves. This was the podcast, There Is No Spoon. Until next time.